Mom, it's time for school!
Written by Justice 3442. Read by No One and Nobody. Love Tap stirred slightly in the warm, cozy covers of her soft blue bed blankets. She felt the day's first rays of sunlight warm her from the window, just to the side of her bed. She nuzzled her light blue pillow slightly as she gently returned from dreamland. Her son's call of,
Mom, it's time for school!
from behind the bedroom door, gently rousing her from her slumber. Still half asleep, she heard the bedroom door open quietly, followed by the gentle sounds of her son's hooves tapping across the hardwood floor and then the throw rug. This was quickly followed by a slight dipping sensation as her son climbed onto her bed, standing on the side that was occupied by her husband when Love Tap was lucky enough to have her entire family home. Her son stood there briefly, no doubt patiently waiting for her to waken and,
Mom! 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 Mom, it's time for school!
Love Tap's bloodshot eyes shot open as her son screamed at her from on top of her bed. She was quickly ripped from dreamland as if some massive predatory bird had swooped down and snatched her up, then unceremoniously dropped her onto the hard, unforgiving ground of reality. Some semblance of coherence returned to her in a rush, her thoughts practically thrown into her brain like items hastily grabbed and tossed into saddlebags, as if one were desperately trying to save items from a house that was burning down.
Mom!
As her vile loin spawn continued to give his lungs a workout, screaming at her as if attempting to rouse her from the sleep of death itself, Love Tap silently wondered what she had ever done to deserve such hellish punishment. A young tan filly with a long hazel-colored mane tied at the end in a red ribbon poked her head up and over the foot of a purple bedspread. Her head and ears cast a soft shadow over the bed and the two ponies who occupied it, the faintest glow of light eking in from behind the lavender drapes behind her. The two adult ponies gently snored away, seemingly completely oblivious to the filly's presence.
Mom! Dad!
The filly screamed at the top of her lungs.
It's time for school!
A cotton-colored mare with a long baby blue mane kept her eyes closed as she mumbled out, Your daughter is awake. A dark brown stallion with a fiery red mane likewise kept his eyes shut as he mumbled back, Before sunrise, she's your daughter.
Mom! Dad! Mom!
In that moment, Love Tap felt she would trade anything, no matter how dear to her or irreplaceable for some peace and quiet, and an opportunity to sleep for however long as she desired. She didn't care what dark entity she had to make a pact with. She just wanted some more rest.
Mom!
Love Tap suddenly turned, staring at her son with wide-open, bloodshot eyes, her mouth a simple flat line. This was an expression that her eldest son had long ago recognized as a sign that he needed to give his mother some space. However, her youngest had not yet picked up on such subtle nuances and could not be deterred by a simple look. Love Tap briefly looked over her brown-coated son. His fiery brown mane shot out from between his ears and under his red, orange, and yellow beanie with a green propeller that spun despite the complete absence of any breeze. His tan saddlebags were full. The directional pad-shaped strap closed over them tightly.
Yes, Button? Sweetie?
Love Tap said, forcing out each word through clenched teeth, as she slowly pushed herself up.
Mommy heard you the first time, and all the subsequent times after that. Oh, okay,
Button Mash said cheerfully as he jumped from the bed and landed onto the blue rug with a tan rectangular outline in the center. Button looked off into space as he began speaking, almost dictating to himself.
I mean, it seemed like it was getting late, so I thought to myself, Self, Mom isn't up yet, and if you leave without lunch or saying goodbye, she's going to be so worried and probably show up to school in the middle of the day with your lunch.
Button turned to face his mother.
And I didn't want to force you to make a trip for me. You already work so hard, and I didn't want you to have to make an extra trip.
Love Tap sighed and allowed a small smile to come to her face as she dwelt upon the irony. Several years ago, Most of her mornings were spent fighting with her eldest son to get him to go to school. She had prayed to Celestia, the powers that be, or anyone or anything that may be listening, that her other son wouldn't fight her tooth and hoof every day to go to school. Little did she know that whomever or whatever was listening had a sense of humor.
"All right, sweetie,"
Love Tap said warmly as she threw the covers off of her and leapt off of the bed.
"Thank you for thinking of me. Let's go make you lunch."
Yay!
Button said triumphantly as he lifted his forelegs and waved them about. The two ponies made their way out of the purple room, down the hall with its beige painted walls, and down the stairs onto a blue carpet. They then made their way into the kitchen, which was also painted beige. Love Tap and Button trotted past a small, round, wooden, pink-colored table. Button stood patiently as Love Tap continued to walk past a large white fridge that was sectioned off into a top and bottom portion. Love Tap stopped in front of the wooden counter and looked down at a cupboard. She leaned her neck down and grabbed a small knob with her teeth. She opened the cupboard and took out a bag-covered loaf of pre-sliced bread, setting it on the counter. She followed this by opening a drawer next to the counter with her mouth, then pulling out a smooth rectangular wooden plank that she sat on the counter. She closed the drawer with a forehoof, then opened the package of bread and pulled out 2 slices, placing them neatly on the board.
"Now, what kind of sandwich would you like?"
Love Tap asked.
Can I have a daisy sandwich, Mom?
Button asked.
"Of course, sweetie,"
Love Tap answered sweetly. She trotted over to the fridge and hooked the edge of her hoof around the handle, opening the fridge. She quickly scanned a shelf and placed her head in the fridge. She pulled her head out, a white plate covered in flowers and some leaves held in her teeth. She closed the fridge door, then set the plate on the counter gently. She began moving some of the contents from the plate and onto the bread with her teeth.
Actually, you know what, Mom?
Button said.
"Yes, sweetie?"
Can I have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
Love Tap looked at the practically already made sandwich and frowned.
Of course, sweetie,"
She answered in a slightly unsure tone.
"Guess I know what I'm having for breakfast."
Love Tap trotted back over to the cupboard and retrieved a jar of a thick brown substance with her forehoofs. She set it on the counter and placed her teeth over the metal lid. She held the lid in place as she rotated the jar under it with her hooves. Once it was open, she gently set the lid on the counter. The jar of peanut butter open, she returned to the fridge and retrieved a slightly round jar full of a red substance. A label that sported a couple of cherries was on the front. Love Tap repeated the process of putting her mouth over the lid and rotating the jar to open the container. Both peanut butter and jelly jars open, Love Tap opened yet another drawer, the topmost drawer in front of her. She leaned her head in and pulled it up, a dull metal knife in her mouth, held downwards by the handle. She slid the sandwich she had been working on to the side, then fetched 2 more slices of bread, placing the slices neatly in the center of her board. Her bread in place, Love Tap dipped the knife into the peanut butter, then pulled it out. She tilted her head back and opened her teeth slightly, allowing the knife to fall into a horizontal position, then clamping her teeth on it once more. She then leaned her head down towards the bread and began to spread the thick brown material over a slice. Peanut butter applied, Love Tap quickly jerked her head and let go of the knife. The knife flew briefly, then landed inside a metal sink, clattering on contact. Love Tap then retrieved another dull knife from the drawer and repeated the process of dipping knife, adjusting knife, and spreading substance on the slice of bread. Once this was done, Love Tap once again jerked her head and allowed the knife to sail over into the sink. Love Tap looked down at the slices of bread with a small amount of pride, each slice covered evenly with either peanut butter or jelly.
Wait!
Button cried. Love Tap's eye twitched as she wondered how often foals simply go missing after wandering into the everfree forest.
Yes, sweetie?"
I think I want lettuce and tomato.
"You think? Or you know?"
Love Tap practically growled out.
I'm 90% sure I want a lettuce and tomato sandwich.
Love Tap simply scowled at the beige wall in front of her, before she once again moved the practically complete sandwich aside and grabbed 2 more slices of bread. She then opened the fridge. She followed this by opening a drawer at the bottom, and then took out a head of lettuce in both forehooves, gently setting it on the counter and repeating the act, this time fetching a large red tomato. Holding the lettuce in both forehooves, she grabbed the edge of a leaf with her teeth and pulled it from the head. She then placed the leaf on one of the slices of bread, then repeated the act of tearing a leaf and adding it to the sandwich. She then looked at the tomato. then her nearly full workspace. Sighing, she slid the bread to the side, allowing the 2 almost ready-made sandwiches to fall off onto the counter. Lovetap placed the tomato on the plank, then placed her head back into the open drawer, coming back up with a sharp knife held horizontally by the handle in her teeth. Gently holding the tomato between her forehooves, she leaned her head down and began to cut slices into the tomato. She sliced until she had made it from one end to the other. Finished, she trotted over to the sink and dropped the knife into it with the others. She then picked up the tomato slices and spread them over the lettuce-covered slice.
Actually, you know what, Mom?
What?
Lovetap asked through clenched teeth, her voice coming out like a repressed scream.
That's perfect.
Button said with a smile as he pointed a forehoof at the leafy daisy sandwich Lovetap had first made.
Oh, okay, sweetie.
Lovetap said as she wiped bits of tomato from her face. Lovetap closed the daisy sandwich up and closed the drawer she had been fetching knives out of. She then lowered her head and closed her teeth around the middle drawer's knob again and opened it. This time, she retrieved a simple brown sheet of paper from the drawer and began wrapping the sandwich. She took a few calming breaths as she wrapped the sandwich and reminded herself that she'd soon be free to catch up on sleep. After she put the lettuce, jam, peanut butter, and bread away. Lovetap gently grabbed the sandwich in her mouth and trotted over to her son. She opened one of his saddlebags and placed the sandwich inside, closing the saddlebag after it.
There you go, sweetie,
Lovetap said in a gentle but somewhat tired tone.
Thanks, Mom.
Button said.
Well, I'm off to school,
Button announced as he trotted out of the kitchen. Lovetap poked her head out of the kitchen.
Have fun, sweetie,
she called.
I will, Mom.
Button said happily. He suddenly stopped mid-trot in the hallway. Lovetap frowned.
What is it, sweetie?
Button Mash turned and suddenly galloped up to Lovetap, flinging his arms around her neck. He hugged her tightly as he said,
I love you, Mom.
Lovetap felt a soothing warm sensation come over her at her son's words. Her body relaxed as she closed her eyes and smiled as she wrapped her own arms around him and gave him a squeeze.
I love you too.
The 2 ponies parted and smiled happily at each other.
All right, sweetie,
Lovetap began.
you better get going. You don't want to be late.
Button nodded.
Right, Mom.
He turned and galloped towards the door, quickly opening it and galloping out into the bright Ponyville day. Lovetap frowned.
Button, sweetie, you forgot to close the door.
Button simply galloped on, growing smaller and smaller as he ran into the distance. Lovetap sighed and shook her head as she trotted down the blue carpeted hall towards the door and shut it. As it closed, a sudden thought that she had forgotten something came over her. She found herself simply staring at the door as she racked her brain.
Button certainly seemed ready for school, and he only needed me to make lunch. So what?
Lovetap shook her head and smiled.
Of course Button is ready for school. He's always so good that way. Such a diligent, cheerful, energetic bundle of...
Slam!
Mom! I'm back!
pure evil that will not, cannot stop until he sucked every lingering bit of life energy from me.
Lovetap slowly lowered her head and stared at the colt that had just screamed at her despite being barely a foot away.
What is it, sweetie?
She asked, managing a somewhat concerned tone, despite the fact that one of her eyes had begun to twitch again.
What did you forget?
I forgot it was Saturday,
Button said simply as he trotted past his mother. Lovetap's eyes shot wide open as her ears flopped around her head.
Oh, that's what I forgot.
Her eyelids began to drift downwards as she felt fatigue and tiredness from a disturbed sleep take hold. She slowly raised one hoof in front of her, and then another, wheeling her body towards the kitchen, where cleanup awaited. Lovetap trudged through the hallway to the kitchen. She stopped as she turned in and gasped. Button stood on the floor with a jar of peanut butter in his hooves. He held the lid in his mouth and carefully screwed the jar back up into the lid, closing the jar. Finished, he looked up with a smile.
Hi, Mom. I thought since you spent all that time making a sandwich and I don't have school and all, I could help you clean up.
Lovetap felt her lips spread out wide and upward slightly.
Thank you, Button. That was very thoughtful of you.
Hey, Mom.
Yes, sweetie?
When I'm done, can we play video games together?
Button asked. Lovetap's smile remained, and she continued to look at Button, but her forehead tensed and wrinkled as she stared at him, silently screaming internally to herself as she looked at her son's beaming, hopeful face. With a Herculean effort, She opened her lips and practically sighed out,
Of course, sweetie.
Yay!
Button cried, once again raising up on his hind legs and waving his forelegs about. Love Tap simply stared off into space as she walked up to the counter and began helping her son put things away. Soon, the mother and son pair had finished and were making their way back up the stairs. Button excitedly bounding up the stairs, while Love Tap trudged behind him with a distant, tired expression. Button paused as he reached the top of the stairs and turned.
Mom?
Yes, sweetie?
Love Tap asked, her voice whisper quiet and distant.
You're the best mom ever!
Button Mash announced happily. Love Tap stopped trotting up the stairs, craning her head up to see her son's joyous expression on his face. Her smile returned and she began to ascend the stairs once more, picking her hooves up high and no longer trudging.
Thank you, sweetie,
Love Tap said as she trotted up to her son.
Mommy couldn't have asked for a better fall than you.
Thanks, Mom.
Love Tap placed an arm around Button and pulled him close to her, giving him a quick hug. She looked down at Button and gave him a slightly mischievous grin.
Race ya?
You're on!
Button cried. Mother and son quickly broke into a gallop, running down the hall and bolting into a room. The end.